Okay. All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay. Welcome to our community conversation. My name is Beth Greeley, and I am the current chair of the Holliston Democratic Town Committee. And this is the first of our 4 events that we have planned for this year, which will all be conversations on topics that we think would be good for our community to discuss. We have decided that really one of the worst things about politics is the lack of discussion and conversation, and that in a town like ours, we want to be able to promote the ideas and exchange of ideas, and hopefully people can respect each other, learn some things from each other, and have some great discussion on the topics that we're moving forward with.
I'm sorry,
so
I
tonight,
missed the topics. What are the topics?
Well, currently they're in development, but in May, we don't have the details on it yet. But we're going to be having an evening on a discussion on global warming. We have a short documentary which is called "Chasing Ice," which will be featured, and then we'll have speakers who can inform us to information on this. So. We hope you'll join us in other events. And the other thing that we think is really critical is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that people need to find a resource for good information. We feel like we've put together some really wonderful professional people who have expertise in different areas, and we hope that you will have a listen and see what you can learn here tonight. What we'll be doing is then we'll open up for some Q&A. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you before I introduce our moderator is I hope you noticed on the way in there's some great high school kids who are doing a Relay for Life program for the American Cancer Society, and they have snacks and coffee, which they're just asking for a donation, and they're trying to fund their 24-hour walk. So go out and get a brownie, grab a cup of coffee, and support their efforts, because they're really great kids. So I would like to introduce Barbara Gardner, who is our moderator tonight. And I think she's the perfect choice for this job. Barbara is probably one of the most respected, articulate, and classy gals in Holliston. And so I'm really happy to have her as our moderator. To tell you a little bit about Barbara, Barbara served as our state rep for 14 years, and then she stepped down to become the Associate Commissioner of School Readiness in Massachusetts Department of Education. Can you tell I left my glasses on the kitchen table? Where she was responsible for reading programs and early childhood education programs. In 2005, she left that position and co-founded Bay State Reading Institution, which serves 40 schools in the state and focuses on whole school turnaround efforts that are based on literacy. She is currently on the board of the trustees at Framingham State University and is active in many regional organizations. Best of all, she is a valued and respected member of our Holliston Democratic Town Committee. So I hope you'll all welcome Barbara. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Beth. And welcome to everyone here this evening. I thought I was going to have to encourage people to move down in the front. You understand how people behave in church, and I thought that I'd have to say, come on down, because then we can see you and interact with you better. But I don't think there are that many seats left, and for the people in the back, I encourage you to take a seat. Take one of the seats if you can.
Actually, the fire chief has just said that we really can't have this overcrowding in the back, so everyone needs to find a seat. So please do that. shut the meeting down. So please move to a seat.
It's like, shut the meeting down.
Let's take this meeting to the range.
Fill it up.
I think we would all feel more comfortable there.
I agree.
I would.
The one good thing is I don't think we're outnumbered here. I don't think we are.
Yeah, definitely not. Not from who I've been talking. No one I've been talking to or not. Yeah, but I think Jim is.
I'd like to begin just to get a sense of the audience. Excuse me. Can people, it's hard for us to see up here, can people who are from Holliston, how many of you are from Holliston? Could you just stand? Okay, and how many of you can sit down, how many of you are from neighboring communities within, contiguous to Holliston?
Wow.
Okay.
Just send a message loud and
Thanks
clear,
very
huh?
much. I'd also like to thank the Democratic Town Committee for organizing this, especially our chair, Beth Greeley, and Diana Vosberg. I'd like to also acknowledge at least one official. As I said, it's hard with the spotlight in my eyes to spot everybody, so if I don't recognize you, I apologize. But we do have our own state representative, Carolyn Dykema, here with us. Carolyn, do you want to stand if you're here? Thank you for coming, and I believe we're expecting Senator Karen Spilka, who represents the town of Holliston in the state senate, to come a little later. If Karen's here, please let me know now. Okay. I'd also like to acknowledge Holliston Cable Access, who's in the back of the room, and they will be taping the show to be aired several times in the next 2 to 3 weeks on Channel 8 in Holliston. The format for this evening is to provide each panelist a chance to talk about their area of expertise for about 5 minutes, followed by an hour of questions from the audience, because we want to hear from you. But I would emphasize that they are questions. I don't want people coming up to the mic and making statements, just questions. We want you to be active participants tonight, not just passive listeners. Microphones have been provided in the front of the auditorium at the end of the aisles for this purpose. You should identify when you do get up for questions, your name and where you are from. You should direct your questions to one particular panelist, but the others will, in some cases, have a chance to jump into the conversation. We'll have a brief wrap-up with the panelists at the end of the evening. Let's talk guns, because we have to. Tragedy isn't one school shooting, horrific as it was. It's the unceasing toll of homicides and suicides every day across our country. Guns are one of the most polarizing issues in American politics. Americans themselves are very conflicted about guns, and often very passionate on both sides of the debate. Suffice it to say, this is a very difficult topic, and people have strong opinions. But tonight we will be civil, and we will be respectful of each other, regardless of our stance. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. The mix-up is, they're not sitting exactly where I had hoped, so we'll just wing this. Way down at the end, to my right, is our very own Chief John Moore, Chief of Police, who graduated from Suffolk Law School in 1988 and practiced law until 1995, when he changed career directions and became a patrolman for the Holliston Police Department. He became Chief of Police in 2011, a Holliston native. He grew up in the Mudville section of Holliston. His mother taught at the Adams Middle School, and his father worked for the Holliston Police Department. Margaret Fitzpatrick has been Director of Holliston Youth and Family Services for the past 11 years and is a licensed independent clinical social worker. Her department provides clinical services to the residents of Holliston, including partnering with schools to identify at-risk youth and develop plans of intervention to help. An old friend and a member of the House of Representatives, way down here to my left, since 1999, Representative David Linsky currently serves as the chair of the House Committee on Post Audit and Oversight. David represents the 5th Middlesex District of the State House, comprised of the towns of Natick, Sherburne, and 2 precincts in Millis. Jim Wallace is sitting next to me here, and he has served as the executive director and a lobbyist for GOAL since 2005. GOAL stands for Gun Owners Action League, the official state organization of the National Rifle Association. A U.S. Army veteran and avid sportsman, Jim advocates on Second Amendment issues and is a frequent guest on local and national media. He has worked to influence Massachusetts gun laws and authored state legislation to protect gun owners. And Jerry Belair is here, and he is General Counsel for Meredith Management, a Massachusetts real estate development company. Jerry is a founding board member and the legislative director of Stop Handgun Violence, the organization responsible for the large billboard bordering the Massachusetts Turnpike that cites gun-related statistics. Jerry was brought up in New Hampshire, where he hunted extensively, and he is a lifelong gun owner. That is our panel. We are delighted to have them, and I'd like to have Chief Moore begin, if he would.
Thank you and good evening. Can everybody hear me on this?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
First off, I'd like to thank the Holliston Democratic Party for sponsoring this event. I'd like to thank Barbara Gardner, someone who I've known for many years, for being the moderator. And I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists for being here with me tonight. There's quite a variety of both information and viewpoints that will be presented to you, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. To start off, the gun control or gun rights debate has been going on for quite some time. Unfortunately, events such as the Sandy Hook school shooting has been a catalyst to bring this to the forefront. It is probably one of the main reasons why we're having these forums both in Holliston and in other towns. I've been asked to speak tonight from basically an educational perspective about gun licensing, safe storage of guns, school safety, and violence prevention. Tonight I speak to you with no political agenda. I'm here to be as informative as I can be to you in the next 2 hours and thereafter about any questions or concerns you might have. And that is extended to our whole department. We have 2 very fine firearms licensing officers in our town, Officer Scanlon and Officer McCrae. And if you do live in the town, or even if you don't, and you have any questions in the future, you can ask them. In terms of gun licensing in Massachusetts, for those who aren't too familiar with it, it's a very closely monitored administrative system of laws and regulations. Licensing, registration, purchasing, selling, and the enforcement of gun laws in the state is among the most rigorous in the nation. Licensing involves a comprehensive system of background checks and a discretionary suitability factor in which to grant a license to carry, applicants have to both pass statutory qualifications and they also have to be found suitable. That makes Massachusetts one of the 8 strictest states in the country in terms of gun licensing. In Massachusetts, when we talk about gun safety and proper storage of guns, Massachusetts goes quite a long ways in that regard. To get a license to carry, someone has to take a firearm safety course. If someone buys a firearm, in all likelihood they'll be given a trigger lock. and they'll be given information in terms of how to secure a gun properly in their house. We'll talk a little further, and I'm sure questions will bring this out. What is the proper way to carry, transport, or store a firearm? Typically, it has to be under your direct control, or it has to be secured. In terms of school safety measures, since Columbine in 1999, school safety measures have been greatly promoted, practiced, and prepared by school departments, police departments, fire departments, and other social services. Since Sandy Hook in 2012, those practices that were in place have been enhanced and have been reviewed. But one of the things I'd like to point out to you in terms of violence prevention, and it doesn't just apply to schools, it can apply to the workplace, it can apply to the home, it can apply to government buildings, any place that the public might be. You have to try to prevent it before it happens. You can't be reactionary. You have to mitigate any threats that might be out there before they actually become violence. So you have to prepare for it. And we as a police department do that. And we do that in conjunction with the schools and with social services in town. And we're ready for it. And if we have to respond, we will. And if there is a violent event, whether it be at a school or someplace else, and whether it involves a gun or some other deadly weapon, we're prepared for it. And would aid in the recovery process as well. So I stand ready for any questions that you might have, and I'll pass it on to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Chief Moore-Murphy. Hello. I am in the unique position to be the only person on the panel that isn't going to talk about guns. As the Director of Youth and Family Services, we provide mental health services to all the residents of Holliston. One of the programs that we feel very strongly about, and we've been employing for the, I don't know, 9 years now, is the team approach to identifying at-risk youth in the town. Because one of the things that I think that has become quite clear as a result of the school shootings is the idea that if we are able to identify at-risk kids early enough, that we might be able to prevent some of these awful tragedies that have happened. I'm proud to say that in our town, we have the approach to this in order to capture at-risk youth in the way that I think it should be done everywhere. We are a small town, and so we are able to work as a team in a way that Youth and Family Services, I go into the schools, we work with, the schools welcome us in, we have ways of identifying through teachers, through guidance people, kids that maybe are starting to fall off the radar and might be, that there's a change in behavior and become problematic, and that we're able to step in and do an intervention at that point and provide family work. We work with the police. We have a court diversion program that we partner with the police on, which, first-time minor offense, kids come to our program and we work with them for 6 months as opposed to them having to go to court. And because we work all of these different departments together, and because we're the size that we are, we're able to get to know the kids and the other members of the community in a way that I think in larger places it's probably a little more difficult. And because I live in this community and I work in this community, and I've been doing this job, as Barbara had mentioned, for I think it's 11 or 12 years now. And so you become and you know the community, and as such you wrap the services around, and you're able to intervene from all different departments in order to hopefully prevent and give kids the support that they need, so that perhaps we can prevent tragedies from happening in our town and other places. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, next is Representative Linsky. Thank you very much, Barbara, and I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I'm hoping that we can have a good, civil, constructive conversation about some of these issues. I want to thank the Holliston Democratic Town Committee and Amherst Middle School for hosting us tonight. And it's good to see so many people here. Why are we here? Let me put it this way. We have a problem in this country, in my view. And we have a problem that is unmatched of any other country in the entire world. By far, the United States of America has more deaths due to gun violence than any other country in the world. We have
Please, we're not going to have that. We're not going to interrupt the panelists.
You're not helping your cause.
You must listen to him respectfully. You can ask him questions later, but right now he is going to talk and you are not.
Like it or not, 32,000 people die every single year in the United States of America due to different forms of gun violence. Between 11,000 and 12,000 of those are homicides. The majority of them are either accidental shootings or suicides. Usually about 16,000, 17,000 a year are suicides. It adds up to 32,000 deaths a year. I want to put that into perspective. On September 11, 2001, 3,000 people tragically died as the result of the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Horrible, horrible incident. As a result of that, we entered into two separate wars, one in Iraq, one in Afghanistan. Thousands more have died. That was due to the deaths of 3,000 people. We have the equivalent number of deaths due to firearms every 5 weeks in this country. Since September 11, 2001, we have lost nearly 400,000 people due to firearm deaths in this country. That is nothing to laugh about. That is nothing to be happy about. We as a civil society should be ashamed that that is what we lead this world in, firearm deaths. So that's why we are here. It's a serious matter. Are they all the same? Can we prevent all of them? No, we can't. What we have to recognize is that there are different reasons that this happens. As I said, most of them are suicides. And let me talk a little bit about suicide. It rips a family apart. It rips a community apart. And the reality is that most suicides are preventable. If you attempt suicide with a handgun, you are successful, and I'll put that in quotes right now, in killing yourself about 90% of the time. If you attempt suicide by any other means, you complete the act of suicide about 30–35% of the time. When people are interviewed after a suicide attempt, the vast majority are happy that they survived. Those are deaths, and they are firearm deaths, and many of them are preventable. Similarly, a lot of firearm deaths are accidents. Those are all preventable. We cannot solve all the different types of firearm violence completely, but we can start to cut it down, and that, in my view, would be making progress. So that what I have done as a result of that, and I'm not a newcomer to this by any means, I want you to know a little bit about my background. I've worked on this issue for over 30 years, since I was a freshman in college. And following college, I went to law school, and then I was an assistant district attorney in Middlesex County for 14 years. And I prosecuted 25 homicide cases and investigated a lot more. And I've had the experience of literally standing over a dead body where one person has shot another. And I've also had the experience of standing over dead bodies where people have shot themselves, and the experience of standing over dead bodies where they've been accidentally shot. That's not a pleasant experience, and it's something that I've had to do professionally, and let me tell you that there's nothing worse than having to go to a family and tell them about how their family member or their loved one died. And so we as a society, whether or not whether or not you agree with me or not, should be able to agree on one thing, that we have too many firearm deaths in this country, and that we need to figure out some way to cut it down. So that what I've done as a result of that is that I sponsored legislation, and this is not the first time that I've sponsored legislation.
It's 5 minutes, you said, ma'am, for the introduction?
I have a timekeeper, thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. We'll help you.
All right, thank you very much. So that my legislation, I'll be happy to talk about it later, is aimed at trying to identify the different types of firearm violence, and each one of the 25 or so different provisions in it is designed to cut down on certain aspects of it. Some go to accidental shootings, some go to suicide, some go to mass shootings, some go to domestic violence, some go to gang violence. There are provisions in there to increase penalties for certain types of firearm crimes. Using a firearm while committing an assault, increase the penalty. Thank you very much. I'm happy to talk about it.
And now, our next speaker is Jim Wallace. Go.
Good evening, everybody. How are we doing? I'm a little shy, so if you can't hear me, just let me know. And also, just so the room knows, I am the evil gun lobbyist in the room. So, you know, recently we have certainly been under attack for a long time. But you know, let me just give you a little history if you don't know about Massachusetts. In 1998, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Gun Control Act, quite a comprehensive piece of legislation that actually turns out to be one of the most convoluted, complex set of laws in the country. There's literally a 400-page book that is published by a retired police chief on how to begin to understand the Massachusetts gun laws. And any citizen that needs a 400-page book to begin to explain to them what is expected of them as a citizen just simply needs to be thrown in the trash and started again. But let's look at the results. In 1998, we had 1.5 million licensed gun owners in the state of Massachusetts. Now, in 2002, the House Post Audit and Oversight Committee under Jim Fagan actually did a study because they were finding people in the field, whether they were out hunting or trying to buy ammunition, that didn't have a current license. They found that even as early as 2002, that the number of licensed gun owners had been decreased from 1.5 million down to 250,000, an 85% reduction. Just last week, gun owners actually released a report using all of the information from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health because they track gun-related injuries in Massachusetts, and they've been doing so since 1994. From 1994 to 1997, gun-related injuries, assaults, and homicides dropped drastically. But since the passage of the 1998 Gun Control Act, in every single category, gun-related injuries related to assaults and homicides have increased dramatically. Homicides with firearms have doubled since 1998. Assaults with firearms have tripled since 1998. And I suppose you can look at accidental deaths and say it's a success because it's been dropped by 50%, but that's only because in 1998 there were 2 and 2011 there was 1. So if you want to count that as a 50% drop, I guess you could. One of the other statistics that's very interesting that I wasn't prepared for was that the FBI, through their violent crime reports, actually show that Massachusetts, if you compare per 100,000 violent crime rate, is the highest state in the Northeast, including New York and New Jersey, which really surprised me. So basically, what happened in 1998 was a whole set of laws that were passed that virtually no one can understand. I've been doing this professionally since 2000, and I still have to look up laws when people call me and ask me for advice. And gun crime has increased drastically. So something obviously went wrong. And it's not like we have just a year or two of evidence. This is almost 15 years now of evidence that the Department of Public Health has gathered and has proven that simply gun control doesn't work in Massachusetts. Now, we can blame our neighbors to the north and we can blame our neighbors to the south, but the bottom line is, when you compare Massachusetts to Massachusetts, gun crime has gone through the roof. So now what do we do about that? Gun Owners Action League has been working now for several years to reform the gun laws we have now to make them, number one, understandable, and number two, effective, while respecting the civil rights of lawful citizens. And unfortunately, most of the gun laws that we have focus on the lawful citizen rather than the actual criminal. As a matter of fact, you can read the police blotters all day long, all across the state, and the first thing that's usually dropped in a case is the gun charge, and then they move on from there. The problem is, right now, as a matter of fact, in Massachusetts, if you're a lawful gun owner, trying to actually maintain your lawful status as a gun owner by renewing your license, rather than the law, which says it's supposed to be renewed in 40 days, is taking now upwards of 4 to 8 months to renew your license. And there's virtually no one in charge of this administration. I actually met with the new Secretary of Public Safety just 2 weeks ago, Andre Cabral, and was talking to her about this. And even though it's a state-mandated license, it's a state-produced license, the state produces the statutes which show who can and can't have a license. They actually have no authority over the issuing people, which are at the local level. So if you have an issue with renewing your license, it's the only state agency where there's no one to go to complain. There's virtually no one in charge of the overall system. So Gun Owners Action League is going to be working very hard in the next couple of years, and hopefully in this session, number one, to bring the laws under control, to respect the civil rights of lawful citizens. But number two, we need to start getting tough on the people who are causing these crimes. If there's anybody in this room that isn't angry about what happened in Connecticut, I'd like to talk to you later, and I'm sure there's a young lady down the table here that would like to talk to you. But we lost 20 babies. We lost 6 brave adults. Should never have happened. You know, the chief may argue with me a little bit, but a can of pepper spray in that front office would have changed everything. But we can't have pepper spray in schools because it's considered ammunition. But I'll be glad to take any questions later as we move along.
Thank you very much.
Yay!
To be fair, let's hold the applause. We're not applauding for everyone, so let's just hold it.
No kidding. Well, one out of 6? I wonder why. 1 out of 6?
Hear from Jill
Very balanced panel.
Yeah.
Applaud for me, right?
No. No.
I always like to get it first because I don't get it after.
Right.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. I've been at this for 2 decades now. I'm a gun owner, lifetime gun owner. I was taught to shoot a gun when I was 5 years old. I hunted extensively in New Hampshire. I hunted in Quebec. I've hunted duck, I've hunted whitetail, I've hunted bear. I know my way around a gun. I became convinced that when 15 kids a day were dying from handguns, and when 32,000 people a year were dying from handguns, that it wasn't really necessary. And something could be done without taking away anybody's right to have a gun. I still firmly believe that. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I believe in common sense gun laws to keep people from getting killed. Sandy Hook should really drive that message home to a lot of people. I want to talk about my 20 years in being an advocate for gun safety. Starting in 1993 when the Brady Bill was passed and you first got universal background checks that the NRA supported, except that they also supported a collector's exemption. They made sure that a collector's exemption got into the universal background check bill. What that collector's exemption was for a collector who had 1 or 2 guns who might want to sell it to a friend or a family member and not have to do a background check. And that made sense at the time. But the collector's exemption is not that anymore. It's evolved. It's evolved to 40% of gun sales in this country being conducted without the benefit of a background check. That's 6.5 million guns a year that are being purchased without a background check. What are people in the NRA, what is the leadership afraid of to say that we should not have a background check? Why would a criminal not go to a gun show and buy a gun, or send a friend to buy 5 guns, or buy 6 or 7 guns himself and sell 4 or 5 to a friend so that he could get his for free? It doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't make any sense to 92% of Americans who believe that a background check should be conducted for every single gun sale in this country. A majority of NRA members believe that every single gun sale should have a background check. It's only the leadership of the NRA that doesn't believe in that. The leadership of the NRA, also in 1993, attacked the CDC because the CDC conducted a study and said that if you have a gun in your house, you're 3 times more likely to have a family member shoot a family member. And it's very unusual for you to use that gun in self-defense. Now, that was a scientific study, and it was certain results. But the NRA was livid. They didn't like the fact somebody was doing a scientific study in the government and coming out with those kinds of results that they didn't agree with. So what did they do? They made sure that that $2.6 million that was spent by the CDC for that study was taken out of their budget. In 2006, it was restored, but then they entered language into the CDC's budget that said, the CDC will not be allowed to use any money for injury prevention in advocating or promoting gun control. So in other words, you can't do any research to find out what it is that's causing deaths from gun violence. You laugh, but that's exactly what happened. And that's exactly what happened. Gun violence kills it. You know what? If 32,000 people a year in this country died from hamburgers, what do you think the CDC would be doing? Congress would be having hearings. What did you recently had congressional hearings because a few hundred people died from an injection made from compounding in Massachusetts. Can you imagine? The CDC cannot investigate the causes of gun violence in this country because the NRA is going to go livid? It's wrong.
The cause of gun violence is bad people.
Gun violence is killing people.
The cause of gun violence is bad people.
Car accidents is killing people. They're not diseases. The CDC studies them.
So we're going to ban cars?
Please let him finish. Please.
All right, so they've done away with funding. They've done away with background checks for 40% of gun sales. And then they went after the ATF&E. The ATF&E, which the NRA, famously called jackbooted thugs, the NRA succeeded in requiring that all evidence from background checks done by the ATF&E would have to be destroyed within 24 hours, thereby assuring that the ATF&E couldn't find where the gun originally came from in the event that they found it in a crime situation. When evidence was uncovered that showed 57% of crime guns were traced to 1% of gun owners, the ATF&E did what they were supposed to do. They initiated some investigations. Well, the NRA got Congress to pass legislation to disallow ATF&E from visiting a gun store more than 1 time per year. The ATF&E is not allowed to visit a gun store more than once a year. The ATF&E is not allowed to require a gun dealer to inventory his stock. You're not running this meeting.
No one is.
All right.
Please let him. I'm running it. Please be quiet.
If you don't like what you hear, you can challenge it later. But I get the right, I have the right, I'm up here, I have the right to say what I want to say.
Linsky,
5 minutes.
Absolute.
You have 5 minutes.
All right, I guess.
So I'm going.
going to question authority and continue here.
No, I think you have opportunity to say more than what you already had. I would give him another minute just because of the interruptions.
I just, all right,
come on.
I want to say what else has happened to the ATF&E because of the NRA. Through their go-to guy, under the, Todd Tier in Kansas, the NRA sponsored legislation that they attached to bills that would not allow the ATF&E to share crime data information from crime guns they'd gotten in crime with law enforcement officials or with the public. They denied the ATF&E from sharing information of crime guns with law enforcement and with the public. And then finally, let me just, they caused the agency to be underfunded, funded to the tune of a decade ago, basically. And in their funding, there were 11 lines that contained information on funded, and there were 76 lines of prescriptions of their powers. For example, when the ATF&E said that they wouldn't allow the import of large capacity shotguns because they had no legitimate hunting purpose, there was a line actually put in their budget to overturn that rule. And there were 75 additional lines to stop the ATF&E from doing the job that it was supposed to be doing.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good. That's great news.
Please be quiet a moment. I would now like to recognize, I think, our state senator is here, Karen Spilka, and I know she wanted an opportunity to address the audience to talk about a piece of legislation she has. I believe it's related to mental health. So Karen, welcome. We mentioned you earlier, but you weren't here, so we're glad that you came, and we'll give you a few minutes to talk about your bill.
Thank you. And I want to thank, is this on?
No. You can.
There you go. Thank you. Can people hear me? Yep. Yeah. Okay. I want to thank the folks that organized this. There may be a lot of disagreement, but that's what's healthy. I think that we need to debate and discuss these issues. So I want to thank all of the panelists for being here, and I will include these thank yous in part of my 2 minutes. I just want to, I have been focusing for the last 7 or 8 years on providing better mental health services to children and families. I think that this is something that we as a state really need to be focusing on, that the sooner we can get mental health services to children and families, because a lot of what the children experience are symptoms of what the families, the parents are going through. So last year, and I'm saying this because I think all of you can help with this, last year, the last bill that we passed in the legislature was a bill that I had been working on for literally 7 years, 7, 8 years, called CHINS Reform, Children in Need of Services. It created family resource centers across the state so children and families will eventually be able to access the mental health services, the substance abuse services, to get them the services a lot sooner in their community without having to go to court, without entering the criminal justice system. This is what I heard for many years that would help give families and children the services and prevent them from hopefully later on down the road having instances like the tragedies at either Newtown or Aurora or across the country that we hear. I'm asking all of you that when we passed the bill, we had a 3-year implementation phase in. I've been involved in meetings in the implementation. But I think that the tragedies have created even more of a sense of urgency to provide these services to our children and families. So I ask if you would like to do something when you leave here, call the administration, call your state rep and your senator, and ask them to implement this reform. It's called the FACES bill, which stands for Families and Children Engaged in Services. It really destigmatizes the need for children to get these services and yet provides them. And we're hoping to do this in a little bit more of an expedited fashion. So that's what I ask. I wanted to at least inform you that we are taking steps on that end to help our children and families. Thank you very much.
In the audience, and there are some people who have an opposing point of view. So occasionally, I am going to ask for people to come forward who might not feel comfortable doing that, to ask if they have a dissenting opinion. But right now, we're going to have questions. I would like them directed at one particular panelist, if I could. And can you please come up, identify yourself, where you're from, and ask your question to one of the microphones in the front of the auditorium. Thank you.
See, that's like a cool.
Hell yeah.
One at a time.
Check, check. Okay, good.
Oh my God, everybody wants to talk. That's right.
Oh, wow.
Keep at it. This thing on. I can get the answer question, girl.
I'm shy.
Yeah, go, go, go.
Obviously.
Go, go, go.
Go, go, go. I love the don't turn on me. Yeah, that's not. Oh, do you want to exchange number, email now before you forget? Or you'll be late.
We have another microphone over on this side, Beth, and the green shirt. You can line up behind her with your questions if you'd like. Okay, this first gentleman in the hat.
Yes, my name is Brian Doe. I'm a law enforcement professional here in Massachusetts, and my question is for Chief John Moore. Being a fellow law enforcement professional, I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States, and I also swore an oath to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Constitution, which both in Article 17 and the Second Amendment specifically states that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And as a law enforcement professional, I'd like to know, from your perspective, if Representative Linsky's bill is passed in regards to having a quote-unquote assault weapons ban, and also, you know, in regards to insurance.
Where's the question?
I'm getting to it. As a law enforcement professional that swore an oath to the United States Constitution, not to politicians, will you uphold your oath to the Constitution of the United States?
Of course, I'll uphold my oath to the Constitution of the United States. However, I will abide by any laws that are passed.
That's not
Any laws?
That's not upholding the oath, then.
Please let him answer the question. Please.
So that's the question that I dug out of what you said.
If that law violates the Constitution, it is an unjust law and thus no law at all. So it is your duty to stand down and not execute an unlawful order or an unlawful law. It is your duty.
Want to ask questions. The pause takes up time.
We have plenty of time.
Yes, and I'd like Chief to be able to fully answer the question. That was a pretty good example of more of a statement than a question. I think we can do that.
I just included it, and, you know, I tried.
Okay.
The full answer to that is, like I said, we do uphold the Constitution. We also follow the laws. If the laws that are passed are deemed unconstitutional by a court, then we follow that court. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
You're the last line of defense.
Which court would that be? The U.N. court?
That's a good question.
Yes, we'll go over here on this side. Yes.
Hi, my question is for Jim Wallace. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Deborah Grumbach, and I'm from Westford, Mass. Jim, I have a question for you. Do you know of any studies that were done after the assault weapons ban on the federal level passed and then sunsetted as to the effectiveness of the assault weapons ban on crime?
Well, I mean, as far as official studies, there's really no reason to study it, because if you look nationwide on an annual basis, just around 300 people are killed by any kind of rifle at all, never mind an assault rifle. As a matter of fact, the deaths from assault rifles are so low that the FBI actually doesn't even categorize it. And actually, if you look at the crime gun statistics, when they were available to the public, there were many categories, even revolver, semi-automatic pistol, and the categories went all the way through. The one category they never had was assault rifle, because it was virtually never used. And by the way, just so people understand, the crime gun statistics are very much swayed, because any gun that is traced by the ATF is automatically considered a crime gun. In the last reports that were available, 75% of guns traced by the ATF were never used in a crime. They were just simply traced.
I think Representative Linsky.
It was directed at Jim Wallace, not Linsky.
Thank you. I just want to say something about that.
No doubt.
I agree with Jim on that. I really do. Because assault weapons aren't the biggest part of the problem. Jim's right. Very few crimes and shootings are committed with assault weapons. It's a small part of the problem.
It's called the modern sport.
The much bigger problem are incidents that occur with handguns. That's what the statistics show. And so I agree with it.
Okay, great. The gentleman in the plaid shirt.
Yep. My name's Jim Ledine. I'm a biochemist.
And where are you from, Jim?
I am from Northbridge. Can people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So maybe this is a bit of an off-speak question. Please don't giggle, because I actually want a serious answer. And before I ask the question, I need to say, as a biochemist, the idea that anybody in the Center of Disease Control, all the virologists and bacteriologists and microbiologists there, would be tasked onto a gun project is an obscene use of resources.
Can we have, that was a question, please.
He actually invited rebut.
A question.
Yes, would you, this is to Representative Linsky, and it has to do with the symmetry of how legislators live relative to the people they legislate over. And would you submit to disclosing your own mental health history and the history of other legislators? Because the pen is mightier than the sword, and you're actually holding the pen. So would you support a bill to require politicians to disclose their mental health history to the electorate before elections?
If they were applying for a gun license, absolutely.
No.
How about voters? How about teachers? How about police officers? How about
it? Because they can't make laws over us. They cannot make laws over us. You can. You have the pen.
The answer for that, my friend, in all seriousness, we have a system in Massachusetts. We have a system in Massachusetts and the rest of the country called elections, where every 2 years I put my name on the ballot and the people of Natick, Sherburne, and Millis decide whether or not they want to elect me or not. And they send me every 2 years. If they don't want to send me in 2014, they won't.
Okay? Bye-bye. The same mental health history that you want.
But when you disclose yours,
He's not the elected official. Why should he?
Okay, you've asked your question. Thank you. Over here.
Great question.
I apologize for holding the flag since I brought it in. I figure I should hold it.
And where are you from?
My name is Timothy Paul Roche. I am from Hudson, Massachusetts. And my question is for Representative Linsky. I had a lot of different questions, and you just sort of brought one to the fore. You said every 2 years you're elected. Being elected does not mean that you can violate the U.S. Constitution. Beautiful. Do you remember the oath of office you took, and have you read the U.S. Constitution?
As a matter of fact, sir, I do, and I have. I take that oath extremely seriously. And I have studied that Constitution as a lawyer for 32 years, and I swore an oath on the day I was sworn into the bar. You're holding it right there. I'm glad you are, sir. But it's not for you and I to determine what the Constitution means. It's up to the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
Okay.
Of course I do.
Please. Okay.
You don't understand the U.S. Constitution.
No, you don't.
Clearly not.
Excuse me, let me just say that I would like the questions to be informational in nature and the answers.
These are our questions.
And these are
we don't like that.
Personal in some cases and emotional. And I think that there's enough facts on either side of the gun issue. If we could just reflect on those and make sure that our questions address something that's already been said by one of the panelists. Okay? Over here.
Sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening. My name is Bob Canning. I live in Natick. I'm a paramedic. I'm an NRA instructor. I'm a registered safety officer. I'm a proud, basically a lifetime gun owner. My question, in the framework of, I heard Mr. Linsky referred to us as, he said we should listen to our rulers. Guess who the ruler is? Anyway, in the framework of that, my question is for Jim Wallace. Jim, could you explain, maybe elaborate a little bit to the crowd here, what the mindset of seemingly anti-constitutional, anti-American by action our legislators do by making it tougher to be a licensed, law-abiding citizen? What have they done to make it harder to be a criminal? Thank you.
Woohoo!
Let him answer.
Questions for Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a real question in there as far as what's going on in the State House. But, you know, you got to realize there's what happens in the State House takes an awful long time. Bad things happen quick, good things happen slow in the State House. And it's just the way the system is designed, unfortunately. But actually, in many cases, we're fortunate that it is that way. Can you imagine if bills could be passed in the State House in a 24-hour period with no hearings and no second readings and no third readings?
You mean like New York State?
Like well, New York? Yeah, New York State, but we don't do that here. And luckily, the process for that is slow. And we've actually been able to bridge a lot of gaps in the State House, especially in the last 5 or 6 years. You haven't seen any laws passed here like you have around the country, and it's because of the bridges that we've gapped and the education that we've done up at the State House. Now, I know you're all angry about what's going on. Certainly I am. I'm Scottish, so, you know, we get the kilts and the blue face paint going, but no, I've been paid big money not to wear the kilt. But we really need to approach this in professional. Everybody here admires and respects the Constitution. The people up in the building, whether you like them or not, have a tough job to do. Some we like better than others, but you still have to respect the fact that they're looking at pieces of 7,000 pieces of legislation in a given year. Certain things are very much important to us. They are being hammered by people from the outside to find an answer to Connecticut. And quite frankly, sometimes the worst things that get to the State House are things that there's no answers for. Connecticut, there's no amount of legislation that you could have passed that would have stopped Connecticut, shy of making sure that anybody who was ever diagnosed of any kind of mental illness was in prison permanently. Police in the school. It's very interesting when you go to that fact. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you. I think it's time, because I want some balance here, to ask for a question. Is there anyone standing in line now that would like to provide a dissenting type of question? I see one hand over here. Okay.
Any people that don't like our rights? Anybody?
Hi, I'm Diana Vosberg. I live here in Holliston, and I'm a member of the Democratic Town Committee, so I helped put this together just in the interest of full disclosure.
Thank you.
And I also have a license to carry pepper spray. So, my question is for Jerry.
License of
And
spikes.
I'm really fascinated by the power of the NRA to shape our national discussion and to affect legislation. And I would like to know more about it, like what percentage of the NRA funding comes from gun manufacturers and other members of the gun industry? And also, how many members of the NRA board or the higher levels of their power structures are also board members of gun manufacturing companies like Glock, Smith & Wesson, Midway, and other companies like that?
Yeah, well, the NRA in the last election cycle, I'm sorry, you can still hear me without this, right?
Try not to.
I know you don't. The NRA in the last election cycle spent about $20 million contributing money to elected officials or officials that would have liked to see get elected, or to various issues. It controls the dialogue in Congress, there's no doubt about that, and it is funded by the gun industry. So when we say the NRA, is responsible for these laws, it really isn't. It's the gun industry. Now, the Shooting Sports Council has identified the gun industry income, or the impact, annually in the United States of about 33 billion, with a B, billion dollars. That's a lot of money. They can sell guns to as many people as the NRA pretty much allows through its legislation and through Congress. So the NRA has managed to allow 40% of gun sales in this country to be done without background checks. It's managed to arm criminals. It's managed to arm terrorists. It's managed to arm mentally ill individuals.
How about Eric Holder?
And now that it's managed to arm all those people, it's trying to convince the rest of Americans to arm themselves against the criminals, terrorists, and mentally ill that they've managed to arm. It's a beautiful business plan. It's a wonderful business plan. It should be taught in every business school in this country.
I remember the NRA running for office. We're going back to the questions. Time out. Time out, everybody. We're going back to the questions, all right?
Can we get a rebuttal? So, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry.
Let's let Jim talk.
Linsky always has rebuttal.
Please, I already identified this man, and then he can have a turn. All right? Please, I already pointed to him to ask his question.
Do you mind if he answers?
Let him ask his question.
All right. My name is John Franceschi, and I'm a resident of Blackstone, Massachusetts. And I have a short series of short questions for Representative Linsky.
Perhaps you can pick one.
Perhaps I could pick a couple.
One.
Representative Linsky, as I understand, you've got some extensive experience as a prosecutor, and you've apparently attended law school. For those of us in the audience that may not have that kind of experience, could you explain to the folks here, in your understanding, of the difference between a right and a privilege?
Lots have been written about that, but can we bring it back?
No!
Please.
We live under the Constitution of the United States of America and the Constitution and the Declaration of Rights.
Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights.
I was talking about the Massachusetts Constitution because that's called the Declaration of Rights, in case you haven't read it. Okay? So, and I'm glad you do because it's an important document. Look, those are questions that, treatises are written about. I can't give you a 2-second answer on that or a 10-second answer, okay?
Well,
I want to bring it to a specific question about laws. It's up to, as I've said this before, our laws, and the chief talked about this before.
Okay.
We live, if I can finish for a second.
Answer the question.
We just want to answer.
The Supreme Court of the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States decides the interpretation of the Constitution.
No, judicial review.
Of Massachusetts decides the Massachusetts Constitution interpretation. That's the system we have. I've read every single amendment. I've been a lawyer for 32 years. Okay?
Not a good one.
I know a lot about this.
Since that question
was... I asked in the beginning of this program for people to be civil.
Since that question was kind of punted on, and I didn't get the answer.
And I don't think that's happening. I want to be able to have people ask the question.
Another question.
And then have it answered.
Look, he didn't get his question
without
answered.
interruption. Can I ask you?
Thought we were going to be civilized.
He didn't get his question answered.
Oh, he didn't get his question answered.
Take care of it.
We're going to go to the next question, sir.
So we don't get rebuttal, we don't get an answer.
I need somebody
What's going on,
from the other side, a question from someone who feels differently. Okay? Jim, somebody will ask Jim a question. When they do, he can have his time for rebuttal. Okay. Ellen, do you have a question? I do. Or did you have a question from the other side?
I'm just waiting to
ask
my question.
Okay.
She's up there.
Okay.
feel strongly about gun control, okay?
Exactly.
Well, listen, we invited you to our house.
What?
This is a public forum.
We invited you here to have a conversation.
This is a public forum.
A respectful conversation. And you need to...
This is a public forum.
Okay? We all did. But let's just be cool and respectful of each other. Because then we can have questions.
Okay, let's go on with our questions. Thank you.
Feel love in this room. Al Prescott. I'm a biomedical scientist. I'm from Westford. If you'll indulge me just 1 second, I'd like to make a statement and then ask a question. The statement is, I'm a gun guy. Just full disclosure. I would appreciate if my fellow gun folks wouldn't talk over other people, please.
Thank you.
Let them say what they want. That will carry its own. My question is for the police chief. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. It's my understanding that police have access to what some folks term assault weapons. Is that correct? AR-15 type rifles, yes. You have access to, normal law enforcement has access to those firearms, is that correct?
We do. Okay.
Do police use them for offensive or for defensive capabilities? I mean, my understanding, just thinking about this, is that police, if they have to arrest someone, they don't kick down a door and just start shooting indiscriminately or anything crazy like that. So you have access to these firearms for defensive capability, is that correct?
I don't know if I'd term it offensive or defensive. I'd term it as protection.
Personal protection. Sure, for the officer.
Protection for the public also.
Sure, okay. So then the only other question that I would have is to anyone who would want to pass a law to restrict that to myself, law-abiding citizens. Why would you want to reduce my defensive capability?
Government doesn't
Thank you. And please, don't talk over people.
Okay, we're going to get a question from
what there's no answer?
A dissenting point of view. Beth?
He answered it. He said protection.
Yeah, no one addressed that question.
This is for another question, right? This is to you, Jim. I understand that in the United States there's around 350,000 guns stolen every year. And I think we can guess, maybe Chief Moore can confirm this, that very few of these guns come back. So with this happening year after year, it's like there's millions of guns that have been stolen that are in the hands of people who should not have them. My concern is mainly for the children that are dying in the inner city. Do you have any suggestions of how we could get these guns back? How we can bring this genie that's out of the bottle back in so that we don't have these guns in the hands of people that have not been, that are not the owners? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I honestly can't tell you, I don't have the statistics of what guns are stolen, but let's just, agree with what you said for now. The biggest thing we can do to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns basically don't have the freedom to access them in the first place. You know, one of the debates I had several years ago with John Rosenthal from Stop Handgun Violence, when he asked me, Jim, can't you at least agree that a level 3 sex offender should have to have a background check before they buy a gun? My question was, let's back up a step. Why are we releasing people from prison who we know are so dangerous we're going to bolt a GPS to them? How about we start dealing with that question first? One of the major things that we actually filed in the last couple of sessions was actually a piece of legislation. We filed it in our big omnibus bill, but we also filed it separately as a piece of legislation, was to create the Criminal Firearms and Trafficking Division of the Massachusetts State Police. And in our legislation, that division would be attached right to the Attorney General's office, and it would be their job to investigate and prosecute any serious gun crime. We're not talking about licensing infractions, or you didn't have the right license for the right gun or whatever. But we're talking about aggravated assault with a firearm, we're talking about homicide, we're talking about the serious gun crimes. And the idea behind it was if we had one unit of the state police, who's obviously going to need the help of all the local officers as well, but if you have one unit in charge of this stuff in the entire state, they are quickly going to be able to figure out who's really involved, where are these guns really coming from, because we know they're not coming from gun shows in Massachusetts, that's for darn sure. So if you had one unit that was dealing with that, you could then start to get parameters and common denominators across the state and really be effective in law enforcement and actually start putting some of these gun traffickers in prison and locking the door and, for as far as I'm concerned, forgetting about it. So that's one of the easy lessons that we can take and move forward with if we can get that legislation passed.
Prosecute criminals. What a concept.
Barbara, can I just comment? I'd have no problem with doing that. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. We have to figure out how to fund it, and maybe if we put our heads together, we can.
Actually, reforming the welfare
This is a beautiful thing, seeing these two agree, isn't it? All right. Ready for your question, sir.
Hey everybody, my name is Will Davis. I live in Hopkinton.
Hi, Will.
I'm an NRA certified safety instructor. I'm an instructor for the Massachusetts Mass Wildlife Hunter Safety Program as well.
Your question.
Getting to that. One thing we can all agree on here is everybody here wants a meaningful way to reduce violence in our society.
Yeah. Yes.
This question is for Jim. Jim, how would the bill that is proposed by Representative Linsky, H3253, reduce violence in Massachusetts?
I don't think it would. Simple.
Really? Thank you. I like your sign.
Hi, my name is Corey Ryan. I've been involved in the mental health world for about 4 years. I've seen a lot of patients come in and out of locked facilities. I'm not an NRA member, and I would like to hear his answer. It's very important to me. Thank you. I read your bill, and I'm looking at where we're putting our energies for legislation. And when I look at where you changed adjudicated to confined, we are now targeting women who've gone in for eating disorders, women who've gone in for postpartum depression. And why can't we spend our money on putting the police on the streets and our energy on putting them on the streets? I voted for Deval Patrick because he promised that. And why can't we do this?
I love it.
$1.9 billion of money he's looking for. I'd like to see some of that money put to the police on the streets so kids are not getting killed in drive-by shootings.
I guess there was a question there, and I think if I could put this into context, I'd appreciate it. I guess what you're talking about, and we can clearly work in the wording, because this is probably the intersection of guns and mental health is probably the most difficult portion. Thank you for pointing it out to me. Probably the most difficult part of a piece of legislation to write, as you know. What she's talking about is the following issue. Massachusetts is one of only 7 states in the country that is not submitting data to the federal database in the National Instant Check System. Let me try to explain this to you. I'm sure everyone here who's a gun owner knows that when you go buy a gun in a gun store, they run your name through the National Instant Check System. And what they're doing is they're checking to know whether under federal law you're a prohibited person. Under federal law, if you've been adjudicated to a mental health institution, you are a prohibited person under federal law to purchase that gun, as well as some other disqualifiers if you're a felon or committed certain other crimes. So what happens is in Massachusetts, because we're not submitting our data into that database, they're checking it for a Massachusetts person, 43 states, but they're not checking to see whether or not you've ever been committed here in Massachusetts. That's wrong, okay? That's wrong. Massachusetts should be submitting its data. Jim and I have actually talked about this issue about whether or not the phrase should be adjudicated or confined, and quite frankly, we're working on that wording because we don't want to do what you just said. We don't want to have people who, went to a mental institution be a prohibited person if it was years ago and it was for something minor, something totally unrelated. But what we do want to do
is we want to make sure that for those people who have a legitimate mental health problem and have been adjudicated, and in some cases confined, we need to figure out what the right wording is, that they are truly sent into the federal database so that they can't. Let me give you an example of this. There was a case in Massachusetts, horrible case, happened up in Wakefield about 10 years ago. Bucko McDermott, if you remember that. Well, Bucko McDermott.
Yeah.
He was someone who had in fact been confined to a mental institution on several occasions. Everybody knew he had severe problems, and yet he legally possessed the gun and went to his workplace and blew away a large number of people. Okay, he was someone that should have been caught up in this NICS and wasn't. Okay, we're working on the wording. Okay, what you should know about the legislative process, the bill that you're holding that I'm filing. Okay, no bill that ever gets filed, whether it's on this or whether it's on health care or taxation or anything else, ever gets enacted exactly the way it's proposed. Jim knows this. We work on bills all the time. What's going to happen procedurally? What's going to happen procedurally is there's going to be a series of hearings on all of the gun-related bills, And I think everybody here should know this. And everyone's invited to come into the State House and testify, pro, con, indifferent, whatever you think, because there's going to be a whole bunch of different hearings. And you contact your own state rep, and you contact your own state senator, and you tell them how you think. And that at the end of the day, a new bill will emerge out of the committee that will have pieces of this one and pieces of that one, and something may or may not end up on the governor's desk. But that's an example of something where you just helped me, and you just helped Jim, because you pointed out an issue, and it's something that we may need to change. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, why don't you see, I'm going to encourage the panelists to stay for a few minutes after the program, and you can approach him then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Hello,
please identify yourself and let yourself if you will.
I'm Michael Jaffe from Harvard. Among other things, most importantly, I'm a parent and a citizen, and public safety is one of my foremost concerns. I have a question for Representative Linsky. Boston Globe recently reported that Governor Patrick filed a proposal to release convicted first-degree juvenile murderers, 17 years and older. My question to you is, would you support a law that would require these individuals, as a condition of their release, purchasing a liability insurance?
What you're talking about is the result of a U.S. Supreme Court decision that says that juveniles can't be committed to prison. So that we have to adjust the law. So that's where it comes from, right?
I'm aware of that.
Okay, so, all right, look, I suppose what the real intent behind your question is my liability insurance proposal related to guns. Am I right? So you probably want me to talk about that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I get the sarcasm in your question.
Because he was laying out pretty big.
If you'd like me to talk about liability insurance, I just want to make a couple of things clear. Okay. My liability insurance proposal is designed to help stop accidental shootings and suicides. That portion of the bill is not designed to cover intentional acts, okay? That's what it is, and let me try to tell you about that, about the liability insurance proposal. If you are an NRA member, you already have the liability insurance that you would need.
I am an NRA member. I do not have a liability insurance.
Well, they gave it to you. You may not know it, but they gave it to you as a privileged member.
Not true.
Okay. Well, if you go to their website and it's on there. Okay?
What if I'm not an NRA member? I do not have a liability insurance.
Well, then you and I are just going to have to agree to disagree on that point, and we'll do it respectfully. Because I respect your opinion, and I'd ask you to respect mine. Okay? But what I'm telling you is that, look, the liability insurance idea, it's an idea, okay? And a lot of different states are considering it, as you know. And that the idea behind it is to encourage safe behavior, to make sure that you use your gun safe, to make sure that you have proper training, to make sure that you do things in a safe manner, to make sure that accidents don't happen, that children don't get guns, and that we keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them so that they don't get stolen. It's an idea, it's something we're looking at, but I'll tell you, I don't think it's something that is a portion of the bill, and it's designed to get after accidental shootings and suicides, not intentional crimes.
So is it yes or no?
It was a foolish question when you realize it's a foolish question.
Well, the feeling is mutual.
No.
I am very glad to hear that you think it's a foolish question. I can assure you the feeling is mutual. And I would like to ask a follow-up question since mine was not.
No, he didn't. No, he did not.
We're going to ask for a dissenting, a question, a person on the other side. Is there someone who would like to ask a question that feels differently than the majority of the
Questions only agreed to.
Sue? Recognized her as well.
That's okay. My name is Susan Hefner, and I do live in Holliston. And I have to say I feel extremely alone in a very large crowd.
Join us.
I have been somewhat disappointed. Thank you all, honestly, for being here. I respect that, listening to everything you have to say. I have been somewhat disappointed a little bit in some of the legislation. I cannot understand any justification for, I'm not going to get the words right, assault rifles or high magazine clips, whatever they're called. And I almost feel like that has been sort of abandoned. I'm hearing people talking about background checks and mental health from Senator Spilka, and I'm so happy to hear that, but is this, I don't understand why we can't push for an assault weapon ban, big clips.
Shows what you know.
Massachusetts does have an assault weapon.
It does.
It does. What you were talking about is the federal law.
The federal law, yeah. And how about the big clips? Because can't we carry a
Same thing. It's covered under the same law.
I apologize.
I just want to get up and I am an NRA member.
Yay!
And 41 years ago, I was in Vietnam when a fairly peaceful and unarmed people were overrun and slaughtered by the thousands. So my question for Mr. Belair, who I heard voice a great deal of frustration that the ATF has been hogtied by the NRA about background checks.
Your question, sir.
My question, sir, is, if we need background checks, how are we going to prevent the ATF from smuggling assault weapons into Mexico? And can we please get a background check on the President of the United States?
What was the question? What was the question?
How do you prevent the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of Homeland Security from smuggling thousands of weapons into Mexico where they've killed over 50,000 innocent, unarmed Mexicans?
Who smuggled them in? The ATF&E?
Oh my God!
Or the people who bought? Under Fast and Furious people, the ATF&E didn't bring the guns to Mexico. The guns were purchased. The guns were purchased by straw buyers. The ATF&E was notified by a gun dealer that there was people buying from him that he suspected he was buying a lot of AK-47s, and that he suspected were buying them as straw purchases and bringing them to Mexico. The ATF&E then took that gun dealer and said, "Sell them." And then said, keep selling these guns to these guys, and he continued to do that for some period of time. The problem was that the ATF&E lost track of all those guns. They didn't have anybody tracking once those guns got into Mexico, and there were about 2,500. There were F-7s, there were AK-47s, there were AR-15s, there were a number of guns, 2,500 of them, that went there. Now, the ATF&E didn't do their job by following these guns once they got to Mexico. And a couple of them came back and killed some Americans and killed thousands of people in Mexico as well. They've now recovered some 700 or 800 of those guns, but there's still a whole bunch of them. No, they have.
I'm a businessman. I was in Mexico.
Yeah, well, they recovered 767 of the guns so far. Well, they have recovered 767 of the guns at last count. And there were 2,500 total that went down. So they haven't recovered some 1800 or whatever it is. But no, that's what happened. That's what Fast and Furious was.
Thank you, Mr. Belair. I think a lot of people understand the
You asked
hypocrisy.
your question, thank you. I'm coming, please.
Don't respond to that.
On to the next question.
Next question.
Don't respond to opposition.
Cindy, I'm asking for a dissenting view right now.
Right here.
Right here.
All right, next time, I'm over here this minute.
I feel bad for her. I'd like to ask Al Hoffman from the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts. I'd like to ask either of the two gentlemen who seem to be promoting that only the government should have guns or have the right to decide who should have them. What about, and I'll take their word for it, that it was 32,000 or so gun deaths a year in the United States. What about the absolute minimum, 34 million, probably 64 million, maybe 100 million deaths in China caused by Mao Zedong trying to establish a communist state in a country where they did not let the citizens have guns, and you have 34 to 100 million. Is there something different about Chinese people? Are they less important than Americans? Isn't that kind of racist?
Sir, who's the question directed?
That was the question.
You just answered the
Are
question.
Chinese people less important than Americans? Isn't that kind of racist?
Okay, I think we're going to go on.
I just want to say that I think in America we fight our battles at the ballot box, thank God, and that's not what happened under Mao. So we do fight our battles at the ballot box. We have been doing that for many, many years, and we're going to continue doing it forever. Nobody is after your guns.
That's funny.
What the hell do you think this meeting's about?
I asked for, the last time, I thought was a question from the other side. So I'd like to recognize,
Finally.
Yes, thank you. I'm Elaine Doyle, and I am from Holliston. And my question is for the chief and others if they want to comment. I'm just wondering if ever we've had in Holliston a gun buyback, and is that anything that you'd be thinking about? And what's the views of other people on that?
Me too.
To my knowledge, there has never been a gun buyback based on past figures of crime or violence in this town. I don't think it would work in town. I don't think it would be feasible, but I'll pass it on to anyone else on the panel that might want to answer that.
I've participated in some gun buybacks. I wasn't very, I didn't think they'd be very effective, and I was right. For the most part, the guns that come in are old guns, people that had maybe a husband died and there was an old shotgun left in the house, or some old antique. But you get some, but they're rare. Generally, you don't get the guns that are used in crimes.
Thank you.
I just want to add that the town of Bedford recently sponsored a minister and the chief of police joined forces and generated some money for a buyback program, and it was widely advertised, and they only got 3 guns. So I suppose that's 3 guns that no longer exist, but it wasn't particularly effective. Yeah? Want to say anything about that?
I mean, you know, traditionally we have not supported gun buyback programs for several reasons. We have attended a few. Worcester actually has one that brings in quite a few guns, but our main problem is sometimes people will bring in, Jerry mentioned that, maybe it was a widow or something. They'll bring in a gun that might be worth $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, and they're getting a $50 gift card for it, and it gets cut in half. The other problem is, for the most part, most of the gun buyback programs, in which that was kind of funny, gun buyback. They didn't sell them in the first place, but gun buyback programs then destroy the guns without tracing them. So if it is a crime gun, it gets destroyed before anybody even gets a chance to trace the gun. So, if a criminal was bringing a gun in, this complete amnesty because it's destroyed before anything's happened.
Oh, I just killed somebody who destroyed that for me.
I'm sure it's happened many times.
Hi, my name is John O'Meara. I'm from Northborough. I'd like to address what I believe is a core issue for many folks here tonight. And it's the question of tyranny. We are really not that much concerned about target shooting and hunting. We're concerned about what the Founding Fathers were concerned about, that a tyrannical government has to be controlled. And it's the reason for the Second Amendment. Now, my question is, why is it necessary for the U.S. government to purchase 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition and purchase also 2,400 armored car vehicles? What are they concerned about?
Who are you addressing?
For Mr. Blair and Mr. Linsky, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have one answer. I have just one answer. You've heard of suicide by cop, where a gunman goes out and points it at a police officer, hoping to get shot because he doesn't have the guts to blow his own brains out. You're talking about suicide by Air Force. You know, your AK-47 is going up against an Air Force, is going up against nuclear weapons. Your AK-47 isn't going to protect you against a renegade.
Not when you've got oath keepers.
Yeah. We fight our battles at the ballot box. We're not going to fight an Air Force with an AK-47 or an AR-15.
That's the question. I'm asking you why the Founding Fathers found it important enough to create the Second Amendment. It's because of tyrannical governments, and that's what many of us are concerned about. Right.
Yes.
Again, I just answered the question.
No, you didn't answer the question.
If your argument is correct, that the Founding Fathers intended for you to have the exact same ability to defend yourself as the federal government, then would you, then would you then argue that you should have an atomic bomb, if you can get one, a tank, an armored vehicle, or any other piece of military equipment in order to fight the government in case they go ballistic? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
A Patriot missile? Is that what you're saying you should have?
Yes.
Second Amendment, the militia of the separate states to be in control of those weapons.
This gentleman has been patient as well.
Hi, thank you. My name is Brandon Navom. I'm a senior software systems engineer, and I live in Lowell, Massachusetts. And my question is for Representative Linsky. The Second Amendment says that our right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. However, you're proposing that we have liability insurance before we can have this right to keep and bear arms. Would this not be analogous to saying, before I could post an editorial, write a blog, or even speak in this microphone, that I would have to buy liability insurance in case I were to libel or slander someone? And what kind of a society would we have if we start taking away the constitutional rights of the poorest people in our community?
We would have... One, we shouldn't be taking away the constitutional rights of anybody. I fully support the Constitution, including the Second Amendment. But let me just say, let me answer the question, and I'd love to be non-interrupted, okay? We live in a country where the Supreme Court has issued two recent decisions on the Second Amendment, the Heller decision and the McDonald decision. And in those decisions, found an individual right to keep and bear arms. We all know what Heller and McDonald did. They also wrote that it is not an absolute right to keep and bear arms, that there are certain points. This is the Supreme Court, and we live under the Constitution. I am sworn to uphold the Constitution, and that's what we're doing. Okay? It is not up to you or me to decide what the Constitution says.
Yes, it is.
Well, then we have a difference. And that gives us anarchy when that happens. When individuals decide what laws are constitutional and what laws are not. That's why we have the Supreme Court of the United States.
And why don't you just hide the Constitution from us?
Please.
That's not constructive to
We've asked and we've answered. We're going to take a couple more questions, and we're going to wrap up this portion of the forum, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to spend about 2 or 3 minutes talking about the 3 things that they think would help most to promote more gun safety in Massachusetts, since we don't have anybody at the federal level, we'll restrict it to local and state. So I want them to be thinking about their answers. So I'm going to take one more person, this gentleman in the red shirt, and then I need somebody who is, I guess, has a dissenting view, meaning that they are not necessarily pro-gun. To speak, and I see a woman holding up her hand. Thank you. So, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm Dick Mangus from Hudson, Mass. And all evening long, we're talking about, well, if we don't like it, we can vote on it. And of course, that's very important. Also, we're dealing, about the solving a problem about unnecessary deaths at whomever, anywhere. And in order to get there, it seems as though this voting thing keeps coming up. If we, you're not going to like this, but why don't we ask voters for a background check and also a tax on them, and then maybe we can change the whole system. But right now, it doesn't seem like it's very constitutional. I mean, there's an amendment.
Your question is directed to who?
Why isn't something done about the deaths? By the way, there's 17,000 deaths a day from illegal manslaughter and vehicular homicides. So let's, if you want to talk about deaths, we also have those. So all of a sudden, we're blaming guns for everything. Thank you.
I'm not sure there was a question. So I'm going to move on to this lady. And if she would ask her question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you identify yourself?
I can. My name is Sharon Antia, and I live in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And I am a dissenting opinion, but I don't know that I'm not pro-gun. I'm not pro or against guns. But I am a member of the Liberal Gun Club, so I feel a little bit outnumbered here as well. But I'm not a gun owner. My question is, when I think about what happened at Sandy Hook, and I know somebody here said there's nothing we could do to have prevented that, and I totally understand that. But one of the things that I wonder is about the storage of the weapons. And if Adam's mother had the ability to store her weapons outside of her house, I wonder if that could have made a difference, if Adam could not have gotten his hands on them so easily. For instance, in Massachusetts, that's not very easy to do. My husband has weapons, and I don't allow them, we don't have them in the house because we have 4 children that we adopted through DSS, and let's just say that it's a little bit unstable. It's very difficult for him to find somewhere outside of the home to store his weapons. So my question, I guess, is for maybe Representative Linsky, if you've given any consideration to storage options outside the home and making that more easy to obtain.
I appreciate the question. And you raise the issue of which is very important, which are safe storage laws. We have safe storage laws in Massachusetts. The chief talked about them a little earlier. But the reality is they're extremely difficult to enforce. And unfortunately, they're generally only enforced in Massachusetts after tragedy happens. When an accidental shooting happens or a gun gets in the hands of somebody it shouldn't have been. And we really need to figure out a way to do this. The police don't and they shouldn't have the right to go into your house to see whether or not you're storing your gun safely. They shouldn't. That's against the Constitution. It's against the
It's okay for insurance companies to shoot up.
Okay? But we do have to recognize as a society that we need to do something about storage. I know that probably the vast majority of people in this room hate a proposal that's in my bill, but it is to, and the reason I brought up is exactly what you did. And I have a proposal in the bill to require that certain types of high-capacity weapons be stored in a locked facility at a gun club or a shooting range, okay? And I know you don't like it, okay? Let me finish, come on, without interruption. No. Okay. The reason I propose that is that I'm hoping that even if it doesn't become law, that some gun clubs will start making those types of facilities available for members who choose to do it, so that they might have a safe place to store it away from their home if they want to. I know that, okay, I know that virtually no club would have today that type of storage facility. But there's no reason that if they wanted to invest some money into it, that they could build it. The security systems exist. Warehouses have that security system. Every gun shop in Massachusetts has that type of system. So that, you know, maybe, just maybe, we could keep some tragedies from happening and some accidental shootings. You've raised a very important issue about safe storage, because I'm sure that there's nobody in this room that wants to see a kid get his hands on a gun and shoot his little friend, okay? Nothing could be worse than that. But if you don't have the ability to store guns safely, unfortunately that type of action just might happen. So we collectively as a society maybe need to figure out a way to have storage facilities available to those people who want them.
Thank you. I think I'm going to take the moderator prerogative and ask one question of my own, and that is to Chief Moore. We had, a couple of years ago, a gun shop opened in Holliston under existing bylaws. There was no hearing or anything about it. It was a surprise to a lot of the residents. And recently there was a burglary. And several, I don't know how many weapons were stolen, but I just wondered, are there now increased protections in that shop? And how do you go about, what's your role in tracing where, I mean, do you take an active role in looking for those guns or reporting them to some other agency so that you can track whether they in fact are used in
What's the question?
Sounds like a statement.
In answer to your first question, yes, there are increased security measures that have been put in place at that gun shop. We have been there, we have seen that. That's a good thing. Number two, this case has been worked almost every day since it happened. We have taken every possible step to both investigate it and to report what's missing. To try to avoid compromising the case itself, there isn't much information I can give, especially in a public forum, but I can tell you that there have been a number of leads, and our hope is, number one, to recover the weapons, and number two, to prosecute the persons that are all persons.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody that asked questions and not thank the people that made statements and interrupted. But generally, I think we had a good discussion. Before you leave, so that we're ending the evening on a constructive note, I'd like to ask each of the panelists very briefly to tell us the 3 things that they think would make the most difference. Things about gun safety that they think would really matter to go forward. So I'm going to begin with Jim.
Only 3, huh? Okay, we got to limit it to 3.
I'm counting.
I guess the most important one would be to reform our laws so they're understandable, they respect the civil rights of people, and get tougher on criminals. That has to be absolute number 1 priority. Number 2 priority is actually bringing firearms education back into the schools for our youth.
There you go.
And I will tell you, it's even more important probably in the inner cities than anywhere else, because I see it firsthand when we do shows like the Topsfield Fair. Because when we have even an antique gun on display, the first thing an inner city kid does is reach for the trigger. We have to bring that education back into the schools. Number 3 is definitely the mental health issues. We have to address that, but we have to address it fairly. We have to make sure that we're actually funding programs, because they haven't been funded in over half a decade. And I know the representative has a funding source in his bill we don't agree with, but there has to be funding sources somewhere, and we need to take care of that as a society.
Thank you, Jim. Chief Moore.
I would agree with Jim in terms of strengthening the mental health system in this state. Would call upon the lawmakers to take that responsibility. Number 2, I've met a lot of people in the crowd tonight. A lot of people are firearms safety instructors. I think you do an excellent job at passing that information on, especially the first-time gun owners. first-time license to carry applicants, and I thank you for that. Because of your help in that regard, we have much less or virtually no accidental discharges. So I thank you for that. And thirdly, we ask you collectively to let us know when you think there's any kind of threat of violence out there, whether it be by way of gun or otherwise. That's information we can use, and that's information that can help us increase public safety.
Well, clearly, my first point is that that we continue to provide quality mental health services for our people. Also, too, that I think that within the community to continue to work as a community together to identify people that are at risk and that need extra help. And I only have two.
All right, you know what I'm going to say. Universal background checks. Every single gun sale in this country should have a universal background check. There are guns getting out to criminals. So that's my #1 priority. #2, Massachusetts, the state has it. I'm talking about federal. We're talking about federal law.
You limited it to Massachusetts, did you not?
Well, I did limit it to Massachusetts, but...
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that helps in Massachusetts too, because in 33 states in this country, you can buy a gun without a background check.
Right.
And 60% of crime guns in Massachusetts that are traced to crime are from those states. So that affects Massachusetts as well. If we have a background check in New Hampshire, in Maine, in Vermont, in Georgia, where most of the crime guns come from that are found in Massachusetts, 60% of them, then we reduce crime in Massachusetts. So I'll prevent crime here by doing that. Secondly, I think on a state level, we do a pretty good job. We have the lowest violence fatality rate in the nation. We're lower than any other state in the nation. That says a lot for what our legislature has done, and for what advocates have done, and frankly for what a lot of gun owners have done, because there are a lot of gun owners out there that believe that some of the laws that have been adopted in this state are common sense and that they've served their purpose. So I think Massachusetts has been extraordinarily successful at reducing gun crime and keeping it low. I would say that I would not be happy to be in Louisiana, which is 7 or 8 times our gun rate. Even New Hampshire, which has a gun fatality rate of 2.5 times our rate. Even Vermont, which has a gun fatality rate of 2 times our rate. And Maine, which has a gun...
15 years old.
Excuse me. Okay, please.
And that's the problem.
Really?
Yeah.
Violent state you want.
It is. It's got 2 times the gun fatality rate of Massachusetts.
What about Chicago?
2 times, double. Well, it does.
Strictest gun laws in the country, and they have the highest murder rate in the country.
I'm done.
You are done.
Representative Linsky.
I think that actually the 3 I'm going to suggest are 3 things that most of the people in this room could probably agree with. The first is that we need to make sure that we vigorously enforce the assault laws and the firearm laws that we have in the books. And that we need to make sure that the existing Bartley-Fox law is absolutely followed, that people who carry a handgun without a license should go to jail. And it's not 1 year anymore. We actually, in the legislature, upped it up to 18 months. So, and then we also need to increase the penalties and make sure that people who commit assaults with firearms, that they're vigorously prosecuted and go to jail. That's #1. #2 is something that really goes to gun safety, and I would hope that people here would agree with this. One of the proposals in my bill is to require to change the curriculum in the firearm safety course to actually include live shooting and handling a real gun at a range. Because you can get, and everybody knows this, not everybody does this, some instructors do it right and bring you to a range. But it is permissible under the law in Massachusetts to get your firearm safety license without ever actually learning how to handle a real gun, that you could have that course taught at your kitchen table. So I think that if you're going to pass a safety course, it should be a requirement that you go to the range and you actually learn how to fire it, load it, and handle it safely. I would hope that that would happen. That's two. And the third is let's bring Massachusetts into compliance with the national instant check system. We shouldn't be one of only 7 states in the country that doesn't send its mental health data, its commitment data into the federal registry. Let's not be one of the 7 states that don't. And I would hope that everyone in this room can agree that let's at least do those 3 things. With regard to everything else, I have a very simple request for everybody. Write your own state rep, write your own state senator, make your voices heard. It doesn't do, let me just tell you, it doesn't do a whole lot of good to rant and rave at legislators who don't represent you, okay? You should do it to your own state rep or state senator, because those are the people that you either vote for or don't vote for. So that's my suggestion.
Why are you here then?
Once again, you gave me a run for my money, but it all worked out beautifully. And I thank you for coming. And I just want to underscore what Representative Linsky said. I think I'm preaching to the choir. I think most of this audience knows how to interact with their own legislators, but many other people don't. And these issues are going to be determined by that and that alone. So I would encourage you, there's also material in the back, out in the foyer, from various panelists, and so please take the information, read it, and become even better informed. Thanks so much for coming. Good night.
No, let's not forget to exchange information for your leave. Are you still recording?